Hey guys, tonight we're traveling somewhere so cold that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, where exposed skin turns black in minutes, and where the simple act of answering nature's call becomes a life or death calculation. We're exploring how people throughout history managed one of humanity's most basic needs in environments that seem designed to kill you. Specifically, how they went to the bathroom at temperatures plunging to minus 71 degrees Celsius and beyond. Picture this, you're standing outside in Siberia, January, 3 in the morning. The air is so cold it feels like inhaling broken glass. Your breath doesn't just fog. It crystallizes instantly into tiny ice particles that locals call diamond dust. The metal zipper on your parka has bonded with the fabric. Your fingers, even in triple-layered mittens, have gone numb. And right now, right this second, you need to pee. Badly. You probably won't survive this if you do it wrong. This isn't ancient history we're talking about. People live in these conditions right now, today, in places like Oymyakon, Russia, officially the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. But humans have been solving this particular problem for thousands of years, and the solutions they've invented range from ingenious to terrifying to occasionally hilarious. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you in sunny California at midnight? Rainy London at dawn? I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fundamental problem is simple. Humans need to eliminate waste regularly, typically several times a day. In temperate climates, this barely registers as an inconvenience. But when the temperature drops below minus 40, the point where Celsius and Fahrenheit actually agree on the number, everything changes. At minus 71 Celsius, which has been recorded in places like Oymyakon and Antarctica, you're dealing with temperatures colder than the surface of Mars during its warmest days. Your body's waste exits at roughly 37 degrees Celsius, body temperature, the moment it leaves your body and meets air that's more than 100 degrees colder. Physics takes over with brutal efficiency. Urine begins freezing before it hits the ground. Feces freeze solid within seconds. And any exposed skin, well, you're looking at frostbite setting in within 60 to 90 seconds, possibly faster if there's wind. The human body doesn't just need to eliminate waste. It needs to do so in a position that exposes some of our most vulnerable anatomy to the elements. Areas with high blood flow, thin skin, and sensitive nerve endings. Areas that, throughout human evolution, were definitely not designed to withstand Arctic conditions. Indigenous peoples of the Arctic, the Inuit, Nenets, Saka, Chukchi, and dozens of other cultures, have lived in extreme cold for millennia. They didn't have the luxury of saying, "This seems impossible," and moving somewhere warmer. They had to solve the problem, and they did, developing techniques so effective that modern researchers are still studying them. The earliest archaeological evidence of human habitation in truly extreme cold environments dates back roughly 30,000 years. These weren't people who wandered into Siberia by accident and froze to death. These were sophisticated survivors who understood their environment intimately and adapted every aspect of daily life, including bathroom habits, to match. One of the first rules of extreme cold survival is counterintuitive. You don't hold it. In temperate climates, you might delay a bathroom trip for convenience. At minus 70, that delay could kill you. Your body expends enormous energy keeping waste warm inside you. The longer you wait, the more energy you burn. In an environment where caloric conservation means survival, you go when you need to go, immediately, no exceptions. But where? And how? Imagine threading a needle while wearing boxing gloves, in the dark, while someone sprays you with a fire hose. That's approximately the difficulty level of managing multiple layers of Arctic clothing, numb fingers, and urgent biological need, while the wind screams around you at minus 60. The design of these traditional garments meant the difference between completing the task quickly and safely versus spending fatal minutes fumbling with frozen fasteners. Location mattered enormously. In permanent settlements, Arctic peoples established designated areas, but not the way you might expect. You couldn't dig a latrine in permafrost, the permanently frozen ground that characterizes much of the far north. The Earth might be frozen solid to a depth of several hundred meters. Instead, Communities identified spots that offered three crucial elements: shelter from wind, distance from living areas and water sources, and relative flatness. The Saka people of eastern Siberia, also called Yakuts, lived in some of the coldest regions on Earth. Historians still argue whether their ancestors migrated to the area or developed their cold weather expertise locally over many generations. But either way, they became absolute masters of winter survival. Their traditional winter homes, yurts made of wood and earth, featured a small anteroom, a transition space between the brutal outside and the warm interior. This anteroom served multiple purposes. It prevented the main living space from losing heat every time someone entered or exited. It provided a place to remove or don outdoor clothing. And critically, it sometimes housed a basic sanitation setup for nighttime emergencies. Typically a simple container that could be emptied in the morning. Because at -70, stepping outside at night isn't just uncomfortable. It's actively dangerous. Your body loses heat 25 times faster in cold water than in cold air. But extreme cold air isn't far behind. Every second of exposure counts. The Saka solution was pragmatic. Handle urgent needs indoors overnight when possible, even if it meant dealing with chamber pots. Pride matters less than fingers and toes. During daylight hours, the calculus changed. Venturing outside became slightly less suicidal, though slightly is doing heavy work in that sentence. Groups traveling across the tundra developed protocols. When someone needed to stop, everyone stopped. The group would position themselves to create a windbreak, standing in a semicircle to block the worst of the wind for the person in the middle. This wasn't about privacy, which is a luxury that extreme environments eliminate quickly. This was about survival through collective action. The materials available for cleaning oneself posed their own challenges. Water freezes solid, obviously. European notions of hygiene, washing with water after bathroom functions, became impossible. Arctic peoples adapted with materials that remained functional in extreme cold. Snow when it had the right consistency. Certain types of moss that grew on rocks and retained some flexibility even frozen. Soft, tanned leather scraps. Animal fur specifically prepared for the purpose. Modern sensibilities might recoil, but these methods worked. The extreme cold actually provided unexpected advantages. Bacteria that cause infections and odor slow down dramatically or become dormant below freezing. Waste freezes solid almost instantly, eliminating some of the mess that would plague warmer climates. The environment itself became a kind of natural sanitation system, freezing and preserving rather than allowing decay. The Chukchi people of Russia's far northeast corner developed an entire cultural framework around bathroom habits during their long winter. Certain euphemisms, certain protocols about who went where when, unspoken rules that governed the intersection of biological necessity and social cohesion in close quarters. When your survival depends on the group functioning smoothly, every aspect of daily life, yes, even this one, becomes part of the social contract. Children growing up in these environments learned extreme cold bathroom protocols as early as they learned to walk. Not through formal instruction typically, but through observation and guided practice. A child needed to master the ability to manage heavy winter clothing, find appropriate locations, minimize exposure time, and handle cleaning materials with numb fingers. These weren't optional skills. They were literal survival necessities. Women faced additional challenges that male researchers historically overlooked or ignored, because of course they did. Menstruation in -70 environments required solutions that combined practical ingenuity with material science. Soft tanned leather, carefully prepared moss, and later, once trade became possible, fabrics acquired from southern regions. These materials had to remain flexible in extreme cold, absorbent, and manageable with frozen fingers, while wearing multiple layers of clothing. The caloric cost of surviving extreme cold is staggering. A person living in -70 conditions might need to consume 5,000 to 7,000 calories per day just to maintain body weight. Your body burns through fuel at an incredible rate, fighting constantly to maintain core temperature. Every biological function, including waste elimination, represents heat loss that must be compensated for through food intake. This created a grim equation. The more time you spent exposed to cold, the more calories you needed. But the more calories you consumed, the more frequently you needed to eliminate waste, which meant more exposure to cold, which meant more calories needed. Arctic peoples balanced this equation through timing, efficiency, and absolute commitment to speed. Speed became everything. Modern Arctic researchers have timed themselves. Yes, someone has studied this scientifically because humans are both dedicated and slightly ridiculous, and found that trained individuals in proper gear can complete a bathroom stop in about 45 to 60 seconds from opening their outer layer to closing it again. That's not leisurely. That's Olympic-level efficiency. Dehydration posed another challenge. In extreme cold, your body loses moisture through breathing. All that frozen breath fog represents water leaving your system. You need to drink regularly, but drinking means you'll need to urinate more frequently, which means more exposure to killing cold. Arctic peoples learned to balance hydration carefully, drinking enough to avoid dangerous dehydration, but not so much that bathroom trips became constant interruptions. The psychological aspect rarely gets discussed, but it's significant. Imagine knowing that a basic bodily function requires you to expose yourself to potentially lethal conditions multiple times per day, every day, for months during the long Arctic winter. The mental toll of that calculation, the constant awareness that comfort and survival are perpetually in tension, would wear on anyone. Yet people adapted. They joked about it, created folklore around it, integrated it into their understanding of normal life. The Nenets have traditional stories that use bathroom humor as teaching tools, passing down practical knowledge wrapped in entertainment. Because humans are remarkably consistent. Regardless of climate, culture, or era, we find ways to laugh about poop. By the time the first European explorers began venturing into the extreme cold regions, they entered environments where indigenous peoples had already solved problems the Europeans didn't even know they would face. And those European explorers? They were about to learn some very cold, very uncomfortable lessons about the inadequacy of their southern approaches to basic human needs. But that's a story for the next part of our journey. The first time a European explorer squatted over frozen ground at -50 degrees, desperately trying to manage layers of wool clothing with fingers already going numb, they probably had a moment of profound clarity about the limitations of their culture's bathroom conventions. The indigenous peoples watching them struggle had been perfecting their techniques for thousands of years. The gap between theoretical knowledge and practical survival wisdom had never been more obvious or more uncomfortable. The Inuit of the North American Arctic developed a sanitation system so elegant that anthropologists are still documenting its nuances today. Their approach combined architectural innovation, material science, and social organization in ways that European visitors completely failed to appreciate initially. Traditional Inuit winter homes, igloos made of carefully shaped snow blocks, featured something remarkable: internal temperature gradients. The sleeping platform, elevated and positioned at the back of the structure, could reach a relatively balmy 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, while the entrance tunnel remained well below freezing. This wasn't accidental. Every aspect of igloo construction reflected deep understanding of thermodynamics that wouldn't be formalized in European physics for centuries. For nighttime bathroom needs, the Inuit used containers made from various materials depending on what was available. Soapstone, carved wood, even carefully prepared seal bladders that could be sealed and disposed of in the morning. The containers went in the coldest part of the igloo, near the entrance, where the cold acted as a natural odor suppressant. In the morning, someone would take the frozen contents outside and dispose of them at designated spots far from living areas and water sources. The genius was in the details. Seal bladders, for instance, could be turned inside out, cleaned with snow, and reused. They were lightweight, flexible even in cold, and completely waterproof. Modern chemists might point out that seal intestinal tissue contains natural antimicrobial compounds, but the Inuit didn't need to understand the biochemistry. They just needed to observe that it worked. During the day, outdoor bathroom trips followed protocols refined over generations. Women typically went in groups, creating those human windbreaks we mentioned earlier. Men did the same. This served multiple purposes beyond just blocking wind: safety in numbers against polar bears or other predators, social bonding time, because apparently humans will socialize anywhere, and practical assistance if someone's clothing froze stuck or fingers became too numb to manage fasteners. The Inuit developed specific clothing designs that European explorers would have benefited from studying more carefully. Traditional women's parkas, Amati featured hoods large enough to carry infants against the mother's back, but also strategic openings and closures that allowed bathroom functions without requiring complete disrobing. The tailoring involved understanding exactly which seams needed to open, which layers could be briefly shifted, and how to minimize exposure time. Cleaning materials varied by season and location. In deep winter, snow worked if it had the right consistency, not too powdery, not too icy. Experienced individuals could judge snow quality instantly, identifying the stuff that would clean effectively versus snow that would just make things worse. This knowledge seems trivial until you're squatting in -60 trying to figure out which handful of frozen precipitation will actually help. The Inuit also used Arctic cotton, a tundra plant that produces soft, downy seed heads. Women gathered this in late summer and fall, storing it for winter use. The fibers were absorbent, relatively soft even when frozen, and biodegradable. Modern backpackers rediscovering this material act like they've invented something revolutionary, which must be amusing to Inuit elders who've known about it their entire lives. Historians still argue whether the Inuit developed these techniques independently or adapted them from earlier Dorset culture peoples who inhabited the Arctic before them. The archaeological record gets murky when you're looking for evidence of bathroom practices from 1,000 years ago. Certain artifacts, stone bowls, carved implements, might have been chamber pots, or they might have been cooking vessels, or both at different times. Ancient peoples were practical about reusing tools. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia faced similar challenges, but developed distinct solutions shaped by their semi-nomadic reindeer herding lifestyle. Their traditional portable homes, lavu, could be erected and dismantled quickly, which meant bathroom solutions needed to be equally mobile. Sami winter clothing featured the gakti, a traditional tunic that could be hiked up quickly when needed. The cut and construction allowed for rapid access while maintaining warmth everywhere else. Underneath, multiple layers of wool and reindeer hide provided insulation, but the clever part was how these layers could be shifted and managed without removing everything. The Sami used birch bark as a cleaning material, harvested during brief summer months and stored for winter. Birch bark contains betulin, a natural antimicrobial compound, though again, traditional peoples didn't need to know the chemistry. They knew it worked and didn't cause irritation, which was knowledge enough. For traveling across the tundra following reindeer herds, the Sami established traditional stopping points where generations of herders had handled bathroom needs. These weren't elaborate structures, just locations that offered slight shelter from prevailing winds, a cluster of rocks, a depression in the landscape, anything that reduced wind exposure by even a few percentage points. The caloric demands of extreme cold meant frequent bathroom stops, but the Sami optimized their diet to manage this. High-fat, high-protein foods from reindeer meat digested slowly and efficiently. Less bulk meant less waste. Modern nutritionists studying traditional Sami diets found them remarkably well-calibrated for their environment. Minimal carbohydrates that would have provided quick energy but required more frequent elimination, maximum fat and protein for sustained warmth. Children learned by apprenticeship, essentially. A Sami child would observe parents and older siblings, gradually understanding the choreography of layers, the judgment of location, the speed required. By adolescence, these behaviors became automatic muscle memory that functioned even when cold dulled conscious thought. The Nenets people we mentioned earlier developed innovations that reflected their specific landscape. The vast, flat Yamal Peninsula where wind screams across endless tundra with nothing to slow it. Their solution involved portable windbreaks made of reindeer hide stretched on collapsible wooden frames. When nature called, you could set up a basic shelter in under a minute, do your business behind it, then collapse it and move on. Think about the engineering knowledge embedded in that simple tool. The frame needed to be strong enough to hold against Arctic winds but light enough to carry while traveling. The hide needed to be tanned to remain flexible in extreme cold. The whole assembly needed to be foolproof enough that someone with numb fingers and urgent need could deploy it quickly. The Nenets also developed a systematic approach to campsite sanitation that European armies wouldn't formalize until the 19th century. Designated bathroom areas always downwind of living spaces, always at least 50 meters away, always in spots where spring melt wouldn't wash waste toward water sources. This represented sophisticated understanding of sanitation principles that European cities were still violating during the same period. For the Chukchi people of Russia's northeastern extremity, the extreme cold actually enabled certain bathroom solutions. They would create ice blocks, literally sawing chunks from frozen freshwater sources, and carve them into chamber pot shapes. Use them, leave them outside where the contents froze solid. Then in spring simply let the whole thing melt and dispose of the waste once the ground thawed. Brilliant or disgusting? Perhaps both, but definitely effective. The Chukchi developed elaborate social protocols around bathroom functions during the long winter darkness. Certain times of day became conventional for bathroom trips, synchronized to meal schedules and work rhythms. This wasn't about rules exactly, more about collective efficiency. If everyone tended to need facilities around the same times, the group could prepare together, provide mutual assistance, and get everyone back inside quickly. Women in Chukchi communities managed menstruation using carefully prepared reindeer hide, moss, and in coastal areas, certain types of seabird down that provided absorbency. These materials were personal items, carefully maintained and reused throughout a woman's reproductive years. The practical knowledge of preparation, how to tan the leather to the right softness, which moss species worked best, how to clean and dry materials in freezing conditions, passed from mothers to daughters. The Yukagir people, a smaller indigenous group in northeastern Siberia, developed bathroom protocols that integrated with their hunting practices. When hunting parties traveled for days across frozen landscapes, they carried minimal gear to move quickly. This meant no dedicated toilet facilities, but they understood snow conditions so thoroughly that they could identify spots where snowdrifts provided natural privacy and shelter. A Yukagir hunter could read the landscape and find a small depression or drift formation that blocked wind from a specific direction, crouch in its shelter, complete the necessary business in under a minute, and return to the group having lost minimal heat. This skill required years of experience reading subtle terrain features that would be invisible to outsiders. For the Yukagir, timing bathroom stops during hunts involved complex calculations. Stop too frequently, and you lose momentum tracking prey. Stop too infrequently, and you risk emergency situations that cost even more time and expose you to greater danger. Experienced hunters developed almost supernatural abilities to judge when stops were necessary and identify optimal moments in the day's travel. All of these Arctic peoples understood something that European explorers had to learn painfully. In extreme cold, there is no privacy, no modesty, no individual dignity that matters more than group survival. The social constructs that made bathroom functions private and unmentionable in European culture became actively dangerous in environments where cooperation and speed meant life or death. Indigenous Arctic cultures developed matter-of-fact attitudes about bodily functions that shocked Europeans raised on Victorian sensibilities. People discussed bathroom logistics openly because everyone's safety depended on everyone else managing these functions efficiently. There was practical humor, lots of it actually, but no shame. The Evenki people, reindeer herders spread across a vast territory of Siberia, told traditional stories that included bathroom scenarios as teaching tools. One story describes a hunter who became too proud to ask his companions for help when his fingers froze and he couldn't manage his clothing. The story doesn't end well for the proud hunter. The moral wasn't subtle. Swallow your pride, ask for help, survive. Material innovation happened through generations of accumulated observation. Someone noticed that certain types of lichen remained slightly flexible even frozen. That knowledge spread. Someone discovered that rubbing a particular oil on leather kept it supple in extreme cold. That technique became standard. Someone figured out that you could pre-warm a chamber pot with hot rocks so it didn't freeze bond to your skin. That wisdom saved untold amounts of suffering. Modern researchers studying these traditional techniques often express amazement at the sophistication involved. But from the indigenous perspective, this wasn't sophisticated science, it was simple survival necessity. You either figured out how to handle bathroom functions in -70, or you died. The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we'll eventually mention? Ancient Egyptians allegedly used it. Arctic peoples had their own array of unlikely-sounding solutions that actually worked. Seal oil rubbed on skin prevented some types of frostbite. Certain fish bladders made waterproof emergency containers. If it sounds weird but kept you alive, it became tradition. The European explorers who eventually arrived in these regions brought their own assumptions about proper bathroom protocols. assumptions that the Arctic environment was about to test comprehensively and ruthlessly. Their porcelain chamber pots and canvas privacy tents would prove spectacularly unsuited for conditions where indigenous peoples had thrived for millennia. But those Europeans were determined to do things their way, even if their way meant freezing their tender bits off. And they did, quite literally in some cases. The year is 1733, and you're a Russian explorer named Vitus Bering, leading an expedition across Siberia to map the strait that will eventually bear your name. You've brought along all the comforts of civilization, including a genuine porcelain chamber pot from St. Petersburg, hand-painted with delicate blue flowers, a symbol of refinement in the wilderness. You're about to discover that porcelain has some very specific temperature limitations. It's 3 in the morning, minus 65 Celsius outside your tent. You reach for your chamber pot in the darkness, and the moment you make contact with the frozen ceramic, the skin of your palm sticks to it. Not metaphorically, literally adheres ice-bonding flesh to porcelain. You now face a choice. Rip your hand free and leave skin behind, or breathe warm air on the contact point for several minutes while your bladder screams protests. Either way, you're rethinking some life decisions. This scenario, or variations of it, happened repeatedly as European explorers pushed into extreme cold regions carrying equipment designed for temperate climates. Their commitment to maintaining civilized standards in environments that gave exactly zero consideration to European sensibilities produced some genuinely tragicomic situations. The chamber pot represented European bathroom culture in portable form, a ceramic vessel that allowed wealthy individuals to avoid outdoor privies, especially at night. In Moscow or London, this made perfect sense. In Siberian winter, it became a liability made of frozen pottery waiting to shatter, stick to human skin, or both. Porcelain and extreme cold have an adversarial relationship. The material becomes brittle below freezing, increasingly so as temperatures drop. At minus 40, a porcelain chamber pot might survive careful handling. At minus 70, the thermal shock of warm liquid hitting frozen ceramic creates stress fractures. The pot doesn't just crack. It can literally explode, sending shards of sharp pottery and your bodily waste in every direction inside your tent. Several expedition journals from the 18th and 19th centuries delicately reference chamber pot incidents without providing details, which is probably for the best. But enough descriptions survive to paint a vivid picture of Europeans learning painful lessons about material science. The British Royal Navy, renowned for discipline and proper protocol, extended those standards to Arctic exploration. Naval regulations specified that officers should maintain civilized hygiene standards even in extreme conditions. This meant chamber pots for officer quarters on ships trapped in Arctic ice. The regulations didn't specify what to do when the chamber pot froze solid overnight, or when emptying it in the morning required chipping out frozen waste with a metal tool. Captain James Cook's third voyage, which included time in northern waters, produced journals that mentioned, usually obliquely, the challenges of maintaining bathroom protocols in cold conditions. Officers were expected to maintain decorum. Sailors were expected to use designated areas of the deck or head. Neither group was particularly prepared for what happens when ocean spray freezes instantly and the ship's head becomes coated in ice. Russian expeditions into Siberia and the Far East faced even more extreme conditions. The Great Northern Expedition of 1733 to 1743, which Vitus Bering led, involved thousands of people moving across some of the coldest inhabited regions on Earth. The expedition's supply lists included chamber pots for officers, delicate ceramic items that had to be transported across thousands of miles of frozen wilderness. Historians still argue whether this represented admirable commitment to civilized standards or spectacular failure to adapt to environmental realities. Probably both. Human beings are excellent at simultaneously displaying determination and stubbornness, especially when freezing body parts are involved. The solution some expeditions adopted was metal chamber pots, copper or pewter vessels that wouldn't shatter in cold. This solved the breakage problem but created new ones. Metal at minus 60 conducts heat away from your body so efficiently that contact with bare skin can cause instant frostbite. Sitting on a frozen metal chamber pot is an experience that no written description can adequately convey, but participants described it as bracing and unforgettable, which seems like considerable understatement. Some ingenious souls started wrapping metal chamber pots in fur or leather to provide insulation. This worked reasonably well until the fur or leather absorbed liquid, froze solid, and became impossible to clean. The improvised padding would gradually accumulate layers of frozen waste until the whole assembly resembled some kind of demented science experiment. Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus, who briefly visited northern Scandinavia in the 1730s, wrote with fascination about how the Sami people managed daily life in extreme cold. He noted their bathroom practices with clinical detachment, comparing them favorably to European methods. Then he apparently tried the European approach himself during winter fieldwork and revised his notes with a new appreciation for indigenous techniques. French fur traders pushing into northern Canada brought their own bathroom assumptions. The French had strong opinions about hygiene and propriety, opinions that Canadian winter tested mercilessly. Trade post records include expenses for replacement chamber pots with notes like, "Previous vessel rendered unusable by frost," or "Shattered during nighttime necessity." The Hudson's Bay Company, which established trading posts across northern Canada, eventually developed practical guidelines for bathroom arrangements in extreme cold. These guidelines represented hard-won institutional knowledge. Use wooden buckets instead of ceramic, keep them inside heated buildings, empty them frequently before contents freeze solid, and for outdoor facilities, dig new pits and fall before the ground freezes. But European pride meant many explorers and traders resisted adopting indigenous methods even when those methods were obviously superior. A French trader wasn't going to squat in the snow like the local peoples. He had standards to maintain. So he'd struggle with frozen ceramic and metal contraptions, suffer preventable frostbite, and write home about the hardships of frontier life without acknowledging that local peoples managed the same conditions just fine. The Lewis and Clark expedition, though primarily focused on temperate and moderate climates, experienced enough cold during winter camps to give the participants perspective. Their journals described the indignity of using chamber pots in leather tents, the challenge of emptying frozen containers, and the growing appreciation for indigenous approaches they observed among the Mandan and other peoples. Canvas privacy tents represented another European innovation that extreme cold rendered ridiculous. The idea was simple: erect a small tent for bathroom privacy, even in camp. In practice, canvas becomes stiff and unmanageable in extreme cold. The tent poles freeze together. The stakes won't penetrate frozen ground. And even if you somehow get the thing erected, standing inside a canvas tent at -60 provides approximately zero actual warmth or protection. Multiple expedition accounts describe abandoned privacy tents, left standing frozen and empty while expedition members quietly adopted the indigenous practice of just walking a short distance from camp, doing the business quickly, and returning. European sensibilities died hard, but extreme cold eventually killed them. The Russian military, expanding across Siberia throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, had to develop systematic approaches for thousands of soldiers stationed in extreme cold. Initially, they tried to replicate European barrack standards: indoor facilities, regular cleaning schedules, civilized protocols. The reality of Siberian winter forced modifications. Military records from Yakutsk, one of the coldest cities on Earth, describe the evolution of winter sanitation facilities. Early attempts at indoor plumbing froze solid. Water-based systems became ice sculptures. Eventually, the military garrison adopted a hybrid approach: heated indoor facilities for true emergencies, outdoor designated areas for regular use, and strict protocols about group bathroom trips during extreme cold. The outdoor designated areas weren't elaborate, just cleared spaces behind buildings where snowdrift patterns provided some wind shelter. Soldiers went in groups, maintained visual contact for safety, and developed a culture of mutual assistance that overrode European modesty conventions. When your comrade's fingers are too frozen to manage his buttons, you help. Pride becomes negotiable when frostbite is the alternative. Prussian military observers studying Russian cold weather techniques brought these lessons back to German military planning. By the mid-19th century, European armies were developing doctrine for cold weather operations that acknowledged, reluctantly, that some indigenous practices were actually brilliant rather than primitive. Scientific expeditions to measure, map, and study polar regions began in earnest in the 19th century. These expeditions were often led by educated men committed to scientific rigor and civilized behavior. They brought scientific instruments, detailed supply lists, and chamber pots. The chamber pots survived about as well as you'd expect. The Swedish Vega expedition of 1878 to 1879, which successfully navigated the Northeast Passage, kept meticulous records of daily life aboard ship during Arctic winter. These records include, because scientists document everything, detailed observations about bathroom arrangements. They tried chamber pots initially, switched to buckets after the pots cracked, and eventually adopted a system that looked suspiciously similar to indigenous practices they'd observed. European women entering extreme cold regions faced compounded challenges. Victorian-era clothing for women involved layers, undergarments, corsets, and voluminous skirts, none of it designed for rapid bathroom access in life-threatening cold. The few women who accompanied expeditions or settled in frontier trading posts had to develop their own solutions, often borrowing liberally from indigenous women's techniques while maintaining enough European convention to avoid scandal. One trading post wife's letters, preserved in a Canadian archive, described the process of adapting European dress for Arctic practicality. She gradually simplified her undergarments, modified her skirts for easier access, and eventually, though she doesn't state this explicitly, probably abandoned most Victorian conventions when faced with -50 temperatures and urgent biological need. The cultural clash between European bathroom propriety and Arctic pragmatism produced some genuinely absurd situations. A British naval officer refusing to squat in the snow because it wasn't gentlemanly, instead suffering hours of discomfort waiting for access to the ship's frozen head. A Russian merchant insisting on privacy screens at a Siberian trading post, screens that blew away in the first major wind. A French explorer trying to maintain dignified posture while wearing so many clothing layers he could barely move. Indigenous peoples watching these European struggles must have experienced a range of emotions from pity to amusement to bewilderment. Here were people claiming cultural and technological superiority, yet they couldn't manage a basic bodily function without elaborate equipment that didn't even work properly. Some Europeans did learn and adapt. Traders who spent years in the north gradually adopted local methods. Explorers who survived multiple expeditions incorporated indigenous techniques. But these adaptations often went unrecorded or were described euphemistically in official reports, because admitting you'd abandoned European bathroom protocols felt like admitting defeat to the wilderness. The chamber pot in extreme cold stands as a perfect metaphor for the broader European approach to polar exploration. Taking tools designed for one environment, refusing to modify them for radically different conditions, and learning through painful experience what indigenous peoples already knew. Eventually, European culture would develop better solutions for extreme cold sanitation, but that would take decades and require finally listening to people who'd been living there successfully all along. For now, though, we're leaving behind the shattered porcelain and frozen metal of European improvisation. Next, we're going to explore what happened when people tried to build permanent bathroom facilities in places where the ground itself never, ever thaws. You're standing in the Yukon Territory in 1898, holding a shovel, staring at ground that's been frozen solid for 10,000 years. You've been hired to dig an outhouse pit for a new mining camp. Your shovel bounces off the permafrost with a dull thunk that reverberates up your arms. You might as well be trying to dig through concrete. Actually, concrete would be easier, at least concrete eventually cracks under persistent hammering. Permafrost just sits there, utterly indifferent to your efforts, frozen to a depth that might extend hundreds of feet below where you're standing. Welcome to one of the most uniquely frustrating construction challenges humans have ever faced, building functional latrines in permafrost country. Permafrost is permanently frozen ground, soil, rock, sediment, and anything else that's been continuously frozen for at least 2 consecutive years. In the Arctic and subarctic regions, permafrost can extend to depths of 1,500 meters. The surface might thaw during brief summer months. This shallow thawed layer is called the active layer, but beneath that, everything remains frozen year-round, century after century, millennium after millennium. Traditional European and American sanitation engineering relied on a simple principle. Dig a hole, build a structure over it, let gravity and decomposition do their work. This approach assumes soil that can be excavated and waste that will eventually break down. Permafrost violates both assumptions spectacularly. The indigenous peoples of permafrost regions never needed to dig latrines because they were largely nomadic or semi-nomadic, moving with animal herds and seasons. When Europeans and Americans established permanent settlements, mines, and military installations in these regions, they had to solve a problem that previous inhabitants had simply avoided by not staying in one place long enough for waste accumulation to become critical. The first mining camps in Alaska and the Yukon discovered the permafrost problem immediately. Miners, accustomed to digging latrines at camps throughout North America, brought their shovels to frozen ground and bounced right off. Some tried pickaxes. Some tried dynamite, which mostly just created frozen craters rather than usable pits. Some gave up on digging entirely and adopted indigenous practices of designated surface areas where waste froze solid and could be dealt with later. Later, in this context, meant spring, when the active layer thawed and several months of accumulated frozen waste suddenly became mobile, odorous, and everyone's problem simultaneously. The stench of a Yukon mining camp in spring melt became legendary. Prospectors described the smell as being strong enough to peel paint and capable of stunning small birds in flight. These descriptions, while colorful, may not have been entirely exaggerated. Some innovative camps tried building above-ground structures, essentially outhouses on platforms with removable collection containers underneath. The containers could be emptied periodically by hauling frozen waste to disposal sites. This worked until the containers themselves froze solid and became impossible to empty without tools, fire, and more patience than most miners possessed after a 12-hour shift in -40. The military installations that began appearing in Alaska in the late 19th and early 20th centuries needed more sophisticated solutions. Army engineers, trained in temperate climate construction, arrived with regulation designs for latrines that assumed diggable soil. Reality forced rapid improvisation. One early solution involved building during the brief summer thaw period. When the active layer, maybe half a meter to a meter deep in most locations, thawed, crews could dig quickly, install latrine structures, and hope the pit would be sufficient. This worked marginally well until winter returned and everything froze solid again. The pit didn't fill with waste so much as accumulate a column of frozen material that would then have to be somehow removed come summer. Historians still argue whether the soldiers who drew latrine pit clearing duty during spring thaw were being punished or just unlucky. Either way, the job involved manual labor with frozen and then partially thawed human waste, and no amount of military discipline could make it pleasant. The town of Dawson City, which exploded from nothing to a population of 40,000 during the Klondike Gold Rush, faced permafrost sanitation challenges at an unprecedented scale. 40,000 people in a frontier town built on permafrost, all producing waste, all needing facilities. The situation was a public health disaster waiting to happen, and in many ways it did. Early Dawson City relied on surface disposal and the natural freezing that made waste less immediately problematic. But spring melt turned the town into what contemporary accounts described as an open sewer. Disease spread easily. Typhoid outbreaks killed dozens. The economic boom that brought people to Dawson also created conditions that killed some of them through inadequate sanitation. City authorities tried to implement regulations requiring proper waste disposal, but enforcement in a frontier gold rush town was nearly impossible. Where exactly were people supposed to dispose of waste properly when the ground was frozen solid 8 months of the year? The regulations existed more to create a legal framework for blaming someone when disease outbreaks occurred than to provide practical solutions. Some Dawson City businesses tried innovative approaches. Hotels and saloons, competing for customers in a boom economy, advertised modern sanitation facilities. This mostly meant indoor chamber pots and someone employed to empty them regularly. Glamorous work that paid surprisingly well because nobody wanted to do it. The waste still went to the same surface disposal areas as everyone else's, but at least the hotel guests didn't have to venture outside into -50 to use an outhouse. The Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition of 1909 in Seattle featured exhibits about frontier life, including surprisingly candid displays about sanitation challenges in permafrost regions. The exhibits showed scale models of various latrine designs attempted in northern settlements. Visitors apparently found this fascinating, perhaps because it made their own bathroom complaints seem minor in comparison. Russian communities in Siberia had been dealing with permafrost construction challenges for centuries before North American settlements faced the same issues. The city of Yakutsk, founded in 1632, developed traditional approaches that worked within permafrost constraints rather than fighting against them. Yakutsk's solution involved surface facilities placed on wooden platforms to prevent any structural heat from melting the permafrost underneath. Yes, building heat could destabilize frozen ground, combined with regular removal of waste to designated disposal areas outside town. The system wasn't elegant, but it functioned. Citizens understood that living on permafrost required different approaches than southern cities used. The key principle Yakutsk developers understood was that permafrost isn't stable when disturbed. If you manage to dig into it or thaw it through sustained heat exposure, you don't get convenient soft soil. You get a muddy, unstable mess that refreezes into unpredictable formations. Buildings sink, foundations crack, and structures tilt at crazy angles. Bathroom facilities built on disturbed permafrost could literally tip over as the ground shifted beneath them. This meant any permanent structure needed to be built on pilings driven into the permafrost or on insulated platforms that prevented heat transfer to the frozen ground. An outhouse might need to be engineered as carefully as a residence. The casual approach to latrine construction that worked in temperate regions, throw up some boards over a pit, became an engineering challenge requiring planning and proper materials. The Trans-Siberian Railway, completed in the early 20th century, included sections through extreme permafrost regions. Railway stations needed bathroom facilities for passengers and workers. The Railway Authority developed standardized designs, elevated structures on platforms, removable collection systems, and detailed protocols for waste disposal at designated locations away from the tracks. These standardized facilities represented some of the first systematic engineering approaches to permafrost sanitation. The designs weren't perfect, but they worked reliably enough to be replicated across thousands of miles of railway. Workers knew what to expect. Passengers knew the facilities would function, if not luxuriously. The system became routine. Mining operations in Alaska and northern Canada eventually adopted similar systematic approaches. Major mining companies, operating year-round camps with hundreds of workers, couldn't afford the disease outbreaks and morale problems caused by inadequate sanitation. They invested in properly engineered facilities, elevated structures, regular waste removal, disposal sites selected for safety and downwind positioning. Smaller operations still struggled. Independent prospectors and small claim miners often reverted to indigenous practices: surface disposal, minimal infrastructure, acceptance that spring would smell terrible. The divide between large corporate mining operations with engineered sanitation and small independent operations using whatever worked grew increasingly stark. The arrival of mechanical equipment changed permafrost excavation possibilities. Steam-powered and later diesel-powered drills could penetrate frozen ground that defeated manual tools. By the 1920s and 1930s, some northern settlements were actually digging latrine pits using mechanical drilling to penetrate permafrost, then blasting with explosives to clear the holes. This sounds more dramatic than it probably needs to be, and it often was. Explosives and permafrost interact unpredictably. The ground might shatter as expected, or it might channel the blast in unexpected directions, or it might absorb the energy and remain frustratingly intact. Blasting latrine pits became a specialized skill that combined demolition knowledge, permafrost understanding, and apparently a relaxed attitude toward personal safety. The chemical toilet emerged as a potential solution in the early 20th century. Instead of digging pits in frozen ground, you could use chemical solutions to break down waste in sealed containers. This worked in theory. In practice, most chemical solutions lose effectiveness at extreme cold temperatures, and the containers still needed to be emptied somewhere, somehow. Some northern settlements adopted chemical toilets for indoor facilities while maintaining outdoor surface disposal areas for the chemical waste mixture. This created a system where waste was treated chemically, frozen, stored, and then disposed of during spring thaw. Multiple steps of handling material nobody wanted to handle once, let alone multiple times. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Ancient Egyptians allegedly valued it for skin protection. Northern settlements in the 20th century developed their own array of unlikely substances for managing sanitation. Lye for chemical treatment, kerosene for preventing freeze bonding, sawdust for absorption and odor control. If it helped manage frozen waste, someone tried it. World War II brought massive military construction to Arctic and subarctic regions. The Alaska Highway, built in 1942 to 1943, required worker camps along its route through permafrost country. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers developed rapid deployment latrine systems, prefabricated elevated structures that could be installed quickly, used for the construction period, then either moved or abandoned depending on strategic value. These military facilities prioritized function over comfort. Soldiers stationed in northern camps during the war described outhouses that were basically wooden boxes on stilts, wind howling through gaps in the boards, temperatures inside barely different from outside. The experience was memorably unpleasant but functional enough to prevent the disease outbreaks that would have crippled construction efforts. Post-war, the military installations that remained in the Arctic required permanent sanitation solutions. This pushed engineering innovation in permafrost construction. By the 1950s, military bases in Alaska and northern Canada featured heated indoor facilities with sophisticated waste handling systems designed specifically for permafrost conditions. These systems typically involved insulated pipes, heated collection tanks, and regular mechanical transport of waste to disposal facilities. The engineering was complex and expensive, but for permanent military installations, the investment was justified. Soldiers still complained about bathroom conditions. Soldiers always complain, but they weren't using outhouses at -60 anymore. Civilian communities in permafrost regions gradually benefited from military engineering innovations. What the military developed for bases eventually became available in modified form for towns and settlements. By the mid-20th century, larger communities in Alaska and northern Canada were installing modern sanitation systems adapted for permafrost conditions. Smaller communities, remote settlements, and individual homesteads still faced the basic permafrost latrine challenge. Some used variations on traditional elevated structures. Some relied on composting systems that worked even when frozen, barely. Some just accepted that living in extreme northern regions meant accepting sanitation solutions that would seem primitive in southern cities. The permanent settlements of permafrost country developed distinct cultures around bathroom facilities and sanitation. Dark humor about outhouse experiences became common. Stories about particularly memorable trips to frozen facilities became legendary. The shared experience of managing biological needs in hostile conditions created social bonds, because nothing brings people together quite like collective suffering through preventable discomfort. But while settlers and miners were figuring out permanent facilities in permafrost regions, another wave of people was pushing even further north in search of gold. And those prospectors were about to face sanitation challenges that made permafrost engineering look straightforward by comparison. The Klondike Gold Rush brought 100,000 prospectors north between 1896 and 1899, and exactly none of them were adequately prepared for winter bathroom logistics at -60. You're one of them, camped in a canvas tent on a claim you paid everything you owned to stake, eating beans and salt pork, dreaming of striking it rich. It's 2 in the morning, January, and your intestines have just issued an urgent notification that cannot be ignored or delayed. Your choices are all terrible. Option 1. Venture outside into temperatures cold enough to freeze mercury solid, drop your trousers, and expose your most vulnerable anatomy to air that can cause frostbite in under 90 seconds. Option 2. Use the bucket inside the tent, adding its odor to the confined space you share with 3 other men who are all eating the same bean-heavy diet, knowing you'll have to deal with frozen contents in the morning. Option 3. Hold it and risk intestinal cramping that might incapacitate you for tomorrow's work. Welcome to the Gold Rush, where dreams of wealth met the brutal physics of biological necessity in frozen environments. The prospectors flooding into the Yukon and Alaska goldfields came from everywhere: Seattle, San Francisco, even New York and London. Most had exactly zero experience with extreme cold. Their education began immediately and painfully, and bathroom functions provided some of the earliest lessons. Canvas tents offered minimal shelter. A small stove might keep the interior above freezing if you fed it constantly, but fuel was expensive and supplies limited. Most miners let the fire die overnight to conserve wood. which meant waking to interior temperatures not much warmer than outside. The bucket inside the tent would be frozen solid by morning, its contents requiring either careful thawing over the stove, an aromatic process nobody enjoyed, or hammering it free as a frozen mass and disposing of it outside. The disposal question seemed simple until you tried it. Where exactly do you throw frozen waste? Too close to camp, and spring thaw would create obvious problems. Too far, and you're making multiple trips carrying frozen human waste through deep snow. Prospectors developed designated dump areas, usually downwind and downslope from camps, where frozen waste accumulated throughout winter in mounds that everyone tried not to think about too carefully. The dietary reality of Gold Rush camps made bathroom frequency a constant challenge. Fresh fruits and vegetables were virtually non-existent. Miners lived on preserved foods, salt pork, dried beans, hardtack, canned goods when they could afford them. This diet produced digestive consequences that ranged from constipation to explosive diarrhea, often alternating unpredictably. Scurvy became epidemic because the preserved food diet lacked vitamin C. Among scurvy's many unpleasant symptoms are intestinal issues that made bathroom frequency and urgency worse. A miner suffering from scurvy might need to venture outside multiple times per night, each trip sapping precious calories and risking frostbite exposure. Solo prospectors had the worst of it. At least miners sharing camps could take turns maintaining fires or provide assistance if someone's frozen fingers couldn't manage clothing. A prospector alone on a remote claim faced every challenge with no backup. Contemporary accounts describe men suffering severe frostbite to fingers, toes, and more delicate anatomy simply because they had to handle bathroom needs alone in the dark at lethal temperatures. The lucky ones worked claims near established camps or small settlements where communal outhouses provided some shelter. These structures ranged from crude to slightly less crude, but they shared common features. Wooden platforms to keep users above snow level, holes sized to minimize cold air exposure, and locations chosen more for convenience than sanitation best practices. The typical Klondike outhouse was a wooden box, maybe 6 feet tall, 3 feet square, with a bench seat over a hole. No pit beneath. Remember, permafrost made digging impossible. Just open air and a growing pile of frozen waste below the platform. Some outhouses had doors. Some just had openings covered with canvas flaps. A few luxurious examples had actual walls without gaps, though these tended to accumulate frost on the inside from users' breath. Using these facilities in deep winter required a specific protocol. You bundled in all your winter gear to walk there, then faced the challenge of managing multiple clothing layers with numb fingers in dim light, while perched over a hole admitting -60 air from below. The cold rising from beneath was shockingly intense. A focus column of frozen air targeting the precise anatomy you just exposed. Speed became everything. Experienced miners could complete the entire process, walk to outhouse, manage clothing, finish business, restore clothing, return to shelter in under 5 minutes. Newcomers took longer and suffered accordingly. Frostbite of the buttocks, thighs, and genitals was common enough that camp doctors considered it routine. Camp doctors, where they existed, treated frostbite cases constantly. The standard treatment involved gradual rewarming, which for sensitive anatomy meant protocols that medical journals described clinically but patients described with considerably more colorful language. Severe cases resulted in permanent damage, scarring, or worse. Some men were sent south because they could no longer function in extreme cold after frostbite injuries to areas essential for bathroom functions. Women in the goldfields, and there were more than history typically acknowledges, faced compounded difficulties. Victorian clothing standards meant more layers, more complicated fasteners, more time exposed to cold. Some women adopted men's clothing for practical reasons, causing social scandal but improving their survival odds dramatically. The few written accounts by women in the Klondike describe bathroom logistics with candor that male accounts often avoided. One woman's diary described developing a system of modified undergarments that could be accessed quickly, worn beneath practical outer layers, and managed even with frozen fingers. She didn't describe this as innovative, just as necessary adaptation that other women in camp had also figured out. Menstruation in Gold Rush camps presented challenges that weren't discussed in polite company but had to be managed nonetheless. Women used cloth that could be washed and reused, But washing in winter meant melting snow for water, heating it, washing quickly, then drying cloth that would freeze stiff almost immediately. Some women developed systems using snow directly for cleaning, then disposing of cloth in ways that avoided camp sanitation areas. The methane problem took miners by surprise. Human waste produces methane gas as it decomposes. In warm climates, this gas disperses harmlessly. In confined spaces, especially during winter when buildings were sealed tight against cold, methane could accumulate to dangerous levels. Several camps reported mysterious illnesses, headaches, nausea, confusion, that nobody connected to methane exposure initially. Some miners tried to improve their tents by sealing every gap against drafts, creating perfectly insulated environments that then concentrated methane from indoor waste buckets. A few discovered the problem when someone lit a match or pipe near an accumulated methane pocket. The resulting explosions were rarely fatal but always memorable and usually destroyed whatever structure they occurred in. After several such incidents, camps developed rules. No indoor waste storage overnight, mandatory ventilation even in extreme cold, designated outdoor facilities only. These rules saved lives but made winter bathroom logistics even more challenging by requiring outdoor trips regardless of temperature or time. The competition for good outhouse locations became surprisingly intense. A sheltered spot, perhaps in a natural depression or behind a rock formation that blocked wind, had genuine value. Miners who staked claims near such locations could charge neighbors for access to superior bathroom facilities. This seems absurd until you've experienced the difference between an outhouse in open wind versus one with even minimal natural shelter. Some entrepreneurial individuals built commercial outhouses in Dawson City and other settlements, charging a few cents per use. These facilities offered marginal improvements over free alternatives. Maybe a sturdier door, perhaps a lamp for nighttime visits. But desperate miners paid gladly. Contemporary accounts describe lines forming outside better quality outhouses while crude free alternatives stood empty nearby. The spring thaw represented catastrophe for sanitation. Months of accumulated frozen waste suddenly became mobile, odorous, and liable to contaminate water sources. Every creek, stream, and river in goldfield areas ran with snowmelt mixed with waste from camps upstream. Downstream camps suffered disease outbreaks because their water sources carried contamination from above. Typhoid, dysentery, and cholera all made appearances during spring melt periods. The mortality rate spiked predictably every spring as disease spread through camps with inadequate sanitation. Prospectors who survived winter cold sometimes died from diseases caused by their own waste mismanagement. The larger mining operations, companies rather than individual prospectors, eventually implemented better practices. Corporate camps built proper elevated latrines with waste disposal protocols. They hired workers specifically to manage sanitation. They enforced rules about waste disposal locations. These camps had lower disease rates, better morale, and higher productivity. Individual prospectors and small partnerships rarely had resources for sophisticated sanitation engineering. They made do with the simplest solutions and accepted disease risk as part of the adventure. Historians still argue whether this represented admirable self-reliance or preventable suffering caused by refusing to cooperate on shared infrastructure. The Nome Gold Rush of 1899 to 1909 repeated all the same mistakes on Alaska's coast. Tens of thousands of prospectors flooded into beaches and tundra around Nome, most with no Arctic experience, many with no cold weather experience of any kind. The bathroom challenges that plagued the Klondike reappeared at Nome with minor variations. Nome had one advantage over inland goldfields: proximity to the ocean. Some camps disposed of waste by carrying it to the beach and letting tides take it away. This created exactly the public health disaster you'd expect. Beach camps downstream of disposal points suffered disease outbreaks. The ocean might have been vast, but local tidal patterns kept contamination in coastal areas rather than dispersing it. Alaska territorial authorities tried to implement sanitation regulations around Nome, with limited success. Enforcement in a frontier boomtown full of armed, desperate men chasing gold was nearly impossible. The regulations existed mostly so someone could be blamed when disease outbreaks occurred. Interior Alaska mining camps faced permafrost challenges without ocean disposal options. They developed systems similar to Yukon camps: elevated structures, surface disposal, acceptance of spring contamination, and periodic disease outbreaks. Each new rush repeated the same patterns: initial chaos, gradual organization, eventual establishment of minimally functional sanitation systems. The decline of the gold rushes left behind abandoned camps, contaminated areas, and environmental damage that persists today. Modern archaeological surveys of historic goldfield sites still find waste disposal areas where nothing grows more than a century later. The contamination wasn't just human waste. Mining chemicals and heavy metals mixed in, but the waste disposal practices of boom-era camps contributed significantly to lasting environmental impact. The men and women who survived the gold rush era and stayed in the north developed hard-won expertise in extreme cold survival, including bathroom logistics. Their knowledge would eventually inform military and civilian approaches to Arctic operations. But that knowledge was earned through frostbite, disease, and suffering that better preparation could have prevented. For now, we're leaving the desperate prospectors behind their frozen waste piles. Next, we're moving to the 20th century's militarization of the Arctic, where armies would face the same bathroom challenges with more resources, more planning, and somehow still manage to suffer many of the same problems. You're a United States Army private stationed at Fort Greely, Alaska, in January 1943. The temperature outside your barracks is minus 57 Fahrenheit. That's minus 49 Celsius for everyone else in the world. And you've just been informed that outdoor latrine duty is part of your training in Arctic warfare. This isn't punishment, your sergeant explains. This is preparation for combat operations in conditions where the enemy isn't just the opposing army but also an environment actively trying to kill you through every exposed surface. Military forces discovered what prospectors already knew. Logistics wins wars, and logistics includes bathroom facilities. The difference is that armies had engineers, budgets, and institutional memory. They could study the problem systematically, develop solutions, and implement them across thousands of soldiers. In theory. In practice, the early military Arctic operations repeated many of the same mistakes civilians had already made, just with better documentation. The Soviet Union led military Arctic expertise because significant portions of Soviet territory experienced extreme cold. The Red Army developed cold weather doctrines starting in the 1920s, and bathroom logistics formed an unglamorous but essential component. Soviet military manuals from the period include surprisingly detailed instructions for establishing field latrines in permafrost conditions. The Soviet approach involved designated latrine areas marked with flags or stakes, located downwind of camps and at least 100 meters from any water source. Soldiers went in groups for safety and mutual assistance. Officers enforced strict protocols about coverage. Even in extreme cold, you buried waste when possible using snow and whatever excavation the frozen ground allowed. The Winter War of 1939 to 1940, when the Soviet Union invaded Finland, provided brutal field testing of these procedures. Soviet troops operated in Finnish winter, which, while not as extreme as Siberia, still reached minus 40 regularly. Finnish forces, fighting on home territory, used superior cold weather knowledge as a tactical advantage. They understood the terrain, the conditions, and how to maintain function when Soviet soldiers were struggling with frozen equipment and basic survival. Finnish soldiers knew how to manage bathroom needs quickly in extreme cold because they'd grown up in those conditions. Soviet soldiers, many from southern regions, learned through painful experience. Frostbite casualties included numerous cases involving bathroom-related exposure. The political officers writing reports delicately described these as cold weather injuries during biological necessities. But field medics knew exactly what had happened. World War II brought massive military focus to Arctic and subarctic regions. The Aleutian Islands Campaign, fighting between American and Japanese forces on Alaskan islands, involved combat in conditions neither side's soldiers were adequately prepared for. The bathroom facilities at forward positions were essentially non-existent. American forces on Attu and Kiska Islands dug slit trenches when possible, used designated surface areas when digging was impossible, and developed improvised shelters that provided minimal protection from wind and weather. Japanese forces did similarly. Both sides suffered frostbite casualties from bathroom-related exposure, though exact numbers are hard to determine because military medical records categorized injuries broadly. The conditions on the Aleutians, cold, wet, windy, and utterly miserable, made bathroom logistics a constant challenge. Soldiers described having to choose between the relative shelter of inadequate facilities during daylight versus nighttime trips in total darkness with weather that could disorient you fatally within minutes. One American sergeant's letter home, which somehow survived censorship, described the routine. You wait until you absolutely cannot wait any longer. You bundle up completely. You walk to the designated area, which is just a spot marked with a stick. You do your business as fast as humanly possible while wind that feels like knives tries to freeze everything exposed. You return to shelter and spend the next hour warming up. Then, a few hours later, you repeat the whole miserable process. The letter became somewhat famous in military history circles because it captured the unglamorous reality of combat operations in extreme environments. Generals plan strategies. Logistics officers plan supply chains. But individual soldiers still have to figure out how to defecate without getting frostbite. The Alaska Highway construction project involved 10,000 U.S. soldiers working through winter to build a road connecting Alaska to the continental United States. The project ran behind schedule partly because planners underestimated how much time workers would lose to cold weather challenges, including bathroom logistics. Construction camps along the highway route needed latrines for thousands of workers. The Army Corps of Engineers developed standardized designs, elevated platforms, group facilities to encourage the safety in numbers approach, locations chosen for wind shelter when possible. The designs worked adequately but required constant maintenance as structures shifted on permafrost or were damaged by weather. Workers on the Alaska Highway developed informal protocols that the official manuals didn't cover. The buddy system for bathroom trips became standard. You never went alone, especially at night or during bad weather. Your buddy maintained visual contact, watched for signs of frostbite or hypothermia, and could provide assistance with clothing that froze stuck or fingers too numb to function. This system saved lives. Multiple documented cases exist of workers who became disoriented in blowing snow during bathroom trips and wandered away from camp. Their buddies prevented them from walking into lethal situations. Other cases involved workers whose clothing froze in configurations they couldn't escape alone. Buddies provided the assistance needed to avoid dangerous exposure. The U.S. military established permanent bases in Alaska as World War II progressed and the Cold War began. These bases required year-round sanitation systems that could handle extreme temperatures. Military engineers developed heated latrine facilities, essentially insulated buildings with heating systems, plumbing designed for cold climates, and backup systems for when primary systems froze despite precautions. The heated facilities represented luxury compared to field conditions, but they came with their own challenges. The plumbing ran through heated utility corridors or was wrapped in heat trace cables to prevent freezing. When heating systems failed, and they did regularly, pipes froze and burst, creating maintenance nightmares and forcing temporary reversion to more primitive solutions. Fort Greely and other Alaska bases became testing grounds for cold weather military equipment and procedures. Everything was tested in operational conditions: clothing, vehicles, weapons, and yes, sanitation facilities. The military approach was systematic. Identify problems, develop solutions, test them, document results, refine designs. Portable field latrines designed for Arctic use emerged from this process. These were prefabricated structures that could be transported by truck or helicopter, set up quickly, used for the duration of field exercises, then moved or winterized for long-term use. The designs evolved through multiple generations as engineers incorporated feedback from soldiers actually using them in -60 conditions. The Soviet military, meanwhile, was developing parallel solutions. Soviet Arctic bases dotted the northern coastline and Arctic islands, outposts maintaining territorial claims and military presence. These bases needed sanitation systems that functioned reliably in the world's harshest climates. Soviet engineering documentation, released after the Cold War ended, shows sophisticated understanding of permafrost construction and cold weather sanitation. Soviet bases used insulated facilities connected to heated buildings, waste processing systems designed for frozen conditions, and protocols that emphasized collective responsibility for sanitation maintenance. Historians still argue whether Soviet or American approaches were superior. The honest answer is probably that both systems worked adequately when properly maintained and funded, and both failed predictably when either maintenance or funding faltered. Frozen pipes don't care about ideology. The Korean War provided different cold weather challenges. The winter of 1950 to 1951 brought extreme cold to the Korean peninsula, temperatures dropping below -30 Celsius. American forces, recently arrived from temperate bases, struggled with conditions they weren't prepared for. Field latrines in Korea became infamous. Slit trenches dug into frozen ground, often inadequately located, poorly maintained, and overwhelmed by the number of soldiers using them. The cold weather at least limited disease transmission. Bacteria don't thrive in extreme cold, but the facilities themselves were memorably awful. One Marine Corps history of the Chosin Reservoir campaign mentions sanitation challenges obliquely, noting that normal field hygiene became difficult to maintain in extreme cold. This understated phrasing covers a multitude of miseries. Soldiers at Chosin operated in -35 Celsius while surrounded by enemy forces. Bathroom breaks meant exposure not just to cold but potentially to enemy fire. The survivors of Chosin developed hard-won expertise that informed future cold-weather military operations. Their lessons learned reports included sections on sanitation and hygiene that, while not dramatic, proved essential for future planning. Where to locate facilities relative to fighting positions. How to maintain minimal sanitation discipline under combat stress. How to prevent cold weather injuries during necessary biological functions. NATO forces began conducting regular Arctic exercises in northern Norway and Alaska during the Cold War. These exercises tested military units' ability to operate in extreme cold and provided opportunities to refine equipment and procedures. Sanitation facilities at exercise sites evolved from crude field expedients to relatively sophisticated temporary installations. The Norwegian military, with home field advantage, demonstrated superior cold weather capabilities that impressed and sometimes embarrassed their NATO partners. Norwegian soldiers knew how to handle bathroom needs quickly in Arctic conditions because they trained in those conditions year-round. American or British units visiting for exercises learned through the familiar process of trying their normal approaches, discovering they didn't work, and adapting. Chemical field toilets became standard military equipment for cold weather operations by the 1960s. These self-contained units used chemical solutions to break down waste and control odor, theoretically eliminating the need for pit latrines or waste burial. In practice, the chemicals lost effectiveness in extreme cold, and the units still needed to be serviced regularly, which meant someone had to handle partially frozen chemical waste. The job of servicing field latrines, whether traditional or chemical, remained universally unpopular. Military humor worldwide includes countless jokes about latrine duty and the various euphemisms different cultures use. American soldiers called it shit detail with characteristic directness. Soviet soldiers had their own colorful terms. The universality of the complaint suggests something fundamental about human nature and military service. Modern military forces operating in Arctic regions, Canadian Rangers in the north, Russian troops on Arctic islands, American units at Alaska bases, use sophisticated sanitation systems that would amaze their World War II predecessors. Heated facilities, advanced waste processing, chemical toilets that function in extreme cold, even portable units that can be airlifted to remote locations. But field operations still sometimes require reverting to basics. When Canadian Rangers patrol remote Arctic territories for weeks at a time, they use techniques that indigenous peoples perfected centuries ago. Designated areas, natural materials, speed and efficiency, collective protocols for safety. The modern military has learned to combine indigenous knowledge with engineering solutions. The psychological aspects of military Arctic bathroom protocols deserve mention. Requiring soldiers to expose themselves to potentially lethal cold multiple times daily for basic biological functions creates stress that commanders must account for. Morale suffers when soldiers are constantly uncomfortable. Performance declines when people are worried about frostbite from necessary bodily functions. Modern military psychology research has studied this specific issue. Soldiers provided with adequate facilities, clear protocols, and proper cold weather equipment show better morale and performance than those forced to improvise. This seems obvious, but military institutions don't always prioritize the obvious, especially for unglamorous issues like bathroom logistics. The lessons military forces learned about extreme cold sanitation eventually benefited civilian operations in Arctic regions. Engineering solutions developed for military bases informed the design of research stations, remote work camps, and northern communities. The institutional knowledge militaries accumulated became public good when shared through engineering publications and international cooperation. But while militaries were systematizing their approaches to Arctic bathroom challenges, another group was pushing even further into the cold. Scientists working at the absolute bottom of the world, where temperatures make Alaska look tropical by comparison. You're a research scientist at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, and it's the middle of Antarctic winter. Outside, the temperature has dropped to -82 Celsius. That's -116 Fahrenheit. With wind chill pushing it even colder. The sun set months ago and won't rise for months more. You're living at an elevation of 2,835 meters on a sheet of ice nearly 3 kilometers thick. And right now, you need to use the bathroom. Fortunately, you don't have to go outside. Unfortunately, the bathroom facilities at the South Pole represent some of the most complex sanitation engineering ever attempted, and when something goes wrong, you might indeed have to go outside. Or deal with problems that make going outside seem preferable. Antarctica presents sanitation challenges that make Arctic permafrost look manageable. The continent is covered by ice averaging 1.9 kilometers thick. There is no soil, no permafrost layer that might thaw seasonally. Just ice extending down to bedrock. You cannot dig latrines. You cannot bury waste. Every single thing brought to Antarctica must eventually be removed or processed completely on-site. The early Antarctic explorers, Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, dealt with bathroom logistics through the same basic approach prospectors used in the Yukon. Designated areas, surface disposal, acceptance that waste would freeze solid and remain frozen indefinitely. Their camps from the early 1900s still exist as frozen historical sites, and yes, century-old frozen waste is part of those sites. Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition of 1910 to 1913 left detailed records of daily life at Cape Evans Base, including oblique references to bathroom arrangements. The expedition built a wooden shelter with a designated area outside for waste disposal. The men trudged to this area multiple times daily through Antarctic winter, exposed themselves briefly to temperatures that could reach -40, and returned to the hut having lost precious body heat. Scott's journals don't dwell on bathroom logistics. He was focused on polar exploration and scientific research, but other expedition members' diaries mention the routine discomfort. One scientist described the nightly bathroom trip as that most unenviable task which requires one to venture from warmth into cold so profound it stops thought. Ernest Shackleton's expeditions followed similar patterns. Designated waste areas, minimal shelter, acceptance that biological necessity required regular exposure to lethal conditions. Shackleton's leadership style emphasized collective hardship shared equally. Officers and sailors used the same basic facilities and endured the same discomforts. The Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, who reached the South Pole first in 1911, brought typical Scandinavian practicality to Antarctic operations. His expedition's preparations included careful consideration of clothing designed for ease of bathroom access, food selection to minimize digestive issues, and protocols that prioritized speed and efficiency over dignity. Amundsen's success compared to Scott's tragedy involved many factors, but the Norwegian attention to unglamorous logistics, including bathroom arrangements, contributed to their overall efficiency. Amundsen's men spent less time exposed to cold during necessary biological functions because they'd planned clothing and procedures carefully. The transition from expedition-era camps to permanent research stations in the 1950s and 1960s required completely rethinking Antarctic sanitation. A dozen men spending weeks or months at a temporary camp could manage with surface disposal and accept that spring winds would scatter frozen waste across the ice. A permanent station with dozens of researchers staying year-round needed actual engineering solutions. The first permanent stations used variations on military Arctic approaches: insulated buildings, designated bathroom facilities, waste collection systems. But Antarctic cold exceeded anything Arctic bases faced. Equipment that worked reliably at -40 failed at -70. Plumbing that survived Alaska winters froze solid at the South Pole. Early stations dealt with waste by collecting it in drums that were either buried in snow or, later, shipped out during the brief summer supply season. Both approaches had problems. Drums buried in snow eventually became locked in ice as snow compressed into glacial ice over years. Shipping waste meant loading it onto vessels, creating jobs that nobody volunteered for. The McMurdo Station, largest of the American Antarctic bases, developed waste processing systems in the 1960s that became models for other stations. McMurdo's location on the coast allowed ocean disposal initially. Waste was simply dumped into the sea. This practice continued until environmental regulations banned it in the 1990s, forcing development of more sophisticated solutions. Historians still argue whether early Antarctic waste disposal practices caused lasting environmental damage. The continent's extreme cold preserves everything, including mistakes. Waste disposal sites from the 1960s remain contaminated today because bacterial decomposition barely functions at Antarctic temperatures. The South Pole Station, operating at the continent's most extreme location, required the most sophisticated sanitation engineering. The station was rebuilt multiple times, each version incorporating lessons from previous iterations. The current elevated station, completed in 2008, features bathroom facilities that represent the cutting edge of extreme cold sanitation design. South Pole toilets use vacuum systems similar to aircraft lavatories. Waste is pulled through pipes by air pressure differentials rather than water flow. This solves the freezing problem. No water means nothing to freeze but creates others. The vacuum system requires power and maintenance. When it fails, the entire station's sanitation capacity fails simultaneously. Backup systems exist, of course. Emergency chemical toilets can be deployed. In absolute worst-case scenarios, the station can revert to the historic approach of designated outdoor areas. But modern Antarctic stations operate under strict environmental protocols that forbid surface disposal. So even emergency situations require waste collection and proper processing. The waste collected at South Pole Station is melted, processed, and eventually shipped north during the brief summer season when supply flights can reach the station. This means storing months of accumulated waste in specially designed facilities, maintained at temperatures cold enough to prevent decomposition but warm enough to prevent damage to storage containers. The thermal management required for waste storage is counterintuitive. You need to keep waste cold enough that it doesn't rot and create unbearable odors, but not so cold that it freezes solid and becomes impossible to load onto aircraft. The optimal storage temperature is somewhere around -10 Celsius, which requires heating at the South Pole where ambient temperatures average -50 year-round. So Antarctic stations burn fuel to heat waste storage facilities. This seems absurd until you consider the alternatives. Storing waste at ambient temperature means frozen blocks welded to containers by ice, requiring hours of labor with heating equipment to free them for removal. The energy cost of maintaining proper storage temperature is less than the labor cost of dealing with improperly stored waste. The International Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1961 and subsequently expanded, includes environmental protocols that govern waste disposal. All waste must be removed from the continent or processed completely. This means modern Antarctic operations generate detailed waste management plans that account for every type of waste generated, including human biological waste. The psychological challenge of Antarctic bathroom facilities deserves attention. You're living in the most isolated, hostile environment humans have ever inhabited continuously. You're separated from civilization by weeks of travel during summer, completely isolated during winter when no flights reach most stations. And several times daily, you're reminded of your biological vulnerability when you use facilities that exist only through constant engineering effort. Modern Antarctic stations have worked to make bathroom facilities as comfortable and normal-feeling as possible. Private stalls, adequate lighting, heating that maintains reasonable temperatures. These comforts matter for psychological well-being during the long Antarctic winter when the same small group lives together for months in darkness. The winter-over crews at Antarctic stations, the people who stay through the months-long winter when evacuation is impossible, develop close bonds partly through shared challenges including sanitation system maintenance. When the vacuum toilet system develops problems at 2 in the morning during a midwinter blizzard, the entire winter crew might be involved in repairs. Stories about Antarctic toilet emergencies become legendary within the research community. Plumbers who've kept South Pole toilets functioning under impossible conditions achieve hero status. Engineers who've designed systems that work at -80 are celebrated in technical publications and over drinks at scientific conferences. Women researchers in Antarctica faced additional challenges historically. Early Antarctic programs were male-only, justified by various excuses including sanitation facility limitations. The first women reached Antarctic research stations in the 1960s and 1970s, and suddenly stations needed to accommodate different biological needs. Menstruation in Antarctic conditions required planning that all male stations hadn't considered. Products needed to be shipped in sufficient quantities for months of isolation. Disposal systems needed to handle different types of waste. Privacy considerations became relevant where they'd been ignored previously. Modern Antarctic stations design facilities to accommodate all researchers regardless of gender, but this required overcoming institutional inertia and sometimes resistance. The history of women in Antarctic research includes unglamorous but important victories like adequate bathroom facilities designed for everyone's needs. The Concordia Station, a French-Italian facility at Dome Sea in East Antarctica, holds the record for lowest temperature recorded at an inhabited facility, -84.6 Celsius. Concordia's sanitation systems must function reliably at temperatures that freeze carbon dioxide out of the air as dry ice. Concordia uses similar vacuum systems to other Antarctic stations, but with additional thermal management. All plumbing runs through insulated, heated utility corridors. Backup heating systems ensure that even if primary heat fails, sanitation systems have independent power. The engineering is redundant to the point of paranoia, but paranoia is appropriate when system failure at -80 could be catastrophic. Research into extreme cold sanitation engineering at Antarctic stations has benefited space exploration programs. The challenges are surprisingly similar: closed environments where waste must be processed completely, extreme temperature management, systems that must function reliably with minimal maintenance, and psychological impacts of dealing with sanitation in stressful isolation. NASA engineers studying life support systems for Mars missions regularly consult with Antarctic station operators. The expertise developed managing sanitation at the South Pole informs designs for spacecraft and potential Mars bases. The connection between the coldest place on Earth and the future of space exploration runs through bathroom engineering. The Japanese Dome Fuji Station, China's Kunlun Station, and Russia's Vostok Station, all located at extremely cold inland Antarctic sites, each developed unique solutions to sanitation challenges. Vostok Station, where the lowest temperature on Earth was recorded at -89.2 Celsius, has operated continuously since 1957 and accumulated unmatched experience with extreme cold sanitation. Russian Antarctic engineers developed waste processing approaches that minimize water use and maximize thermal efficiency. Their systems influenced modern Antarctic station design worldwide. The international scientific community in Antarctica shares technical knowledge freely because everyone benefits from better solutions to shared problems. The future of Antarctic research involves larger stations, longer duration missions, and potentially permanent settlements. Each advance requires more sophisticated sanitation engineering. Current research focuses on closed-loop systems that process waste completely on-site, recovering water and other resources rather than shipping everything north. These advanced systems would eliminate the need to transport waste, reducing fuel costs and environmental impact. But they require technology that functions reliably at extreme cold, which remains a significant engineering challenge. The simple vacuum toilet that works at -80 is impressive enough. A complete waste processing facility that operates at those temperatures would be revolutionary. For now, Antarctic stations continue using systems that combine proven technology with careful maintenance and backup redundancies. Researchers accept that bathroom facilities, while vastly better than what Scott's expedition endured, remain one of the less glamorous aspects of Antarctic life. But they function, which in -80 cold represents a genuine engineering triumph. We're leaving the Antarctic research stations now, those technological fortresses maintaining civilization at the bottom of the world. But there's another group of people living in extreme cold who don't have the benefit of modern engineering. Nomadic herders following traditions that predate stations, vacuum toilets, and Antarctic treaties by thousands of years. You're a Nenets reindeer herder on the Yamal Peninsula in northwestern Siberia, and you've spent your entire life moving with the herds across some of the coldest territory humans inhabit. It's March, the temperature hovers around -40°C, and you're camped in a chum, a traditional conical tent covered with reindeer hides. Your family has been following the same migration routes for generations, and the knowledge of how to live in this environment without modern heated buildings or engineered facilities runs in your blood as surely as the reindeer migrations run through the seasons. The Nenets, Sami, Evenki, Chukchi, and other nomadic Arctic peoples developed bathroom solutions that work reliably without requiring anything you can't carry or make from available materials. No plumbing, no vacuum systems, no heated facilities. Just accumulated wisdom refined over thousands of years about how to handle biological necessities while living mobile in killing cold. The fundamental principle is simple. You adapt to the environment rather than trying to dominate it. You move with the cold, dress for the cold, eat for the cold, and yes, manage bathroom needs within the constraints the cold imposes. This isn't primitive, it's sophisticated adaptation to conditions that would kill unprepared people in hours. Traditional Nenets winter clothing, the Militsa for everyday wear, the Gus for extreme cold, features strategic design elements specifically for bathroom access. The Militsa is a pullover garment made from reindeer hide with the fur facing inward for insulation. It extends to the knees and features a hood attached directly to the body of the garment. The critical detail: it can be hiked up quickly without removing layers underneath. Beneath the Militsa, Nenets wear fitted pants of reindeer hide, also furnward. These pants have openings designed for rapid access. The entire clothing system allows you to manage bathroom needs while exposing minimal skin to cold. A practiced individual can complete the entire process, adjusting layers, handling business, restoring clothing, in under 2 minutes while staying largely covered. Compare that to European clothing of the same historical period. Multiple layers of wool, complicated buttons and fasteners, undergarments that required significant disrobing. A European trying to match Nenets' efficiency would spend 5 minutes fumbling with frozen buttons while losing dangerous amounts of body heat. The Nenets developed cultural protocols around bathroom functions that prioritized safety and efficiency. You never went alone, especially in darkness or bad weather. You informed others where you were going. You chose locations that provided wind shelter behind the chum in a slight depression, anywhere that blocked the worst of the wind. Wind matters more than absolute temperature for human survival in cold. -30 with wind is far more dangerous than -50 in still air. The Nenets instinctively understood this long before Western science formalized wind chill calculations. They read the landscape for wind patterns and selected bathroom locations accordingly. Cleaning materials came from the environment. Snow of the right consistency, not too powdery, not too icy, worked effectively. The Nenets could judge snow quality instantly based on how it compressed in the hand. Too soft and it wouldn't clean properly. Too hard and it could cause skin irritation or damage. The ideal snow had a slight moisture content that allowed it to clump slightly, providing cleaning action without excessive coldness. Arctic cotton, harvested during brief summer months, provided reusable cleaning material. Women prepared this during summer, drying and storing it for winter use. The cotton fibers remained relatively flexible even frozen and could be used repeatedly if properly maintained. Certain types of moss, gathered from rocks and tundra during seasons when it was accessible, served similar purposes. The Nenets knew which moss species worked best, where to find them, and how to prepare and store them. This knowledge passed from parents to children through observation and practice rather than formal instruction. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia developed parallel solutions adapted to their specific environment. Traditional Sami winter clothing featured the gakti, a tunic that could be hiked up quickly, worn over multiple layers that provided insulation while allowing access. The design philosophy matched the Nenets' approach: enable necessary functions while maintaining maximum warmth. Sami reindeer herders moving across northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia's Kola Peninsula faced similar challenges to the Nenets, but in slightly different terrain. The Scandinavian tundra includes more rock formations, which the Sami used as windbreaks and navigation landmarks. Traditional bathroom areas developed along migration routes where rock formations provided natural shelter. These traditional locations persisted for generations. A Sami herder could navigate hundreds of kilometers of migration route partly by knowing where the good bathroom spots were. This seems trivial until you understand that these locations also indicated good camping areas, sheltered valleys, and places where reindeer would naturally pause. The integration of bathroom logistics into broader environmental knowledge demonstrates how nomadic peoples thought holistically about survival. Every aspect of daily life connected to larger patterns of movement, weather, terrain, and animal behavior. Evenki reindeer herders, spread across a vast territory of central and eastern Siberia, developed variations suited to their specific regions. Some Evenki groups operated in the coldest permanently inhabited areas on Earth, regions where January averages -50 and can reach -70. Their approaches to extreme cold survival, including bathroom management, represented the absolute cutting edge of human adaptation. Evenki winter camps positioned chums to create windbreaks for each other. The layout wasn't random. Families arranged their dwellings to provide maximum collective wind protection. Bathroom areas were positioned in the sheltered zones created by this arrangement. The entire camp became a cooperative survival system where individual comfort and safety depended on community planning. Children in nomadic herding cultures learned bathroom protocols as early as they learned to walk. A toddler would observe parents, older siblings, and other community members managing layers, choosing locations, and handling materials. By age 5 or 6, children could manage their own bathroom needs independently even in moderate cold. By adolescence, they could handle extreme conditions that would incapacitate untrained adults. This education happened through immersion rather than explicit teaching. Nobody sat children down for bathroom in extreme cold lessons. Children simply grew up seeing the correct approaches demonstrated constantly and naturally adopted them. The learning was unconscious but absolutely thorough. Women in nomadic herding cultures managed menstruation using materials they prepared during summer months. Reindeer hide tanned to extreme softness, moss prepared and dried for absorbency, and later, once trade became possible, cloth acquired from settled communities. These materials had to remain functional in extreme cold, which meant understanding how different substances behaved when frozen. The preparation of menstrual materials represented specialized knowledge passed from women to daughters. Men in these cultures generally knew that women managed these needs but weren't involved in the specific techniques. This wasn't about shame or secrecy. Nomadic cultures were matter-of-fact about biological functions, but rather about division of expertise. Modern anthropologists studying nomadic Arctic cultures have documented elaborate systems of knowledge around materials, techniques, and timing that relate to intimate hygiene. This research often surprises people who assumed nomadic peoples simply endured primitive conditions. The reality is sophisticated adaptation using available resources. The Chukchi people of Russia's far northeast, including groups that practiced nomadic reindeer herding and those that lived along the coast hunting marine mammals, developed solutions suited to their lifestyle. Coastal Chukchi had access to marine mammal products that inland herders lacked: seal skin, walrus hide, which provided different material options. Chukchi traditional winter homes, yarangas, featured complex multi-layer construction. The outer layer provided weather protection. An inner layer created insulation space. The innermost layer, called a polig, was a smaller sleeping chamber heated by body warmth and a small oil lamp. This architectural sophistication extended to waste management. Designated areas outside but within the outer layer's shelter, protected from wind but separated from living space. The Chukchi developed specific timing protocols. Bathroom trips synchronized with other necessary ventures outside: feeding dogs, checking weather, tending reindeer. Combining tasks minimized total exposure time. A person might feed the dogs, use bathroom facilities, check on the herd, and return, one exposure period accomplishing multiple necessary tasks. This efficiency mindset pervaded nomadic Arctic cultures. Every action, every movement, Every expenditure of energy was calculated for maximum return. Not consciously necessarily, it became instinctive through cultural practice. But the underlying logic was ruthlessly efficient. Minimize cold exposure, maximize effectiveness, never waste effort or body heat. Historians still argue whether nomadic Arctic peoples' sophisticated cold weather adaptations developed independently in each culture or spread through cultural exchange along ancient trade routes. Archaeological evidence suggests both processes occurred. Some innovations developed locally, others spread through contact between groups. The introduction of modern materials and technology into nomadic herding cultures created interesting hybrid solutions. Reindeer herders who adopted snowmobiles for transportation might still use traditional clothing for its superior functionality in extreme cold. Families living in modern heated houses during winter might still set up traditional chums for spring migration because the older approach worked better for mobile herding. Some younger generation herders adopted Western clothing, parkas, boots, synthetic layers, and discovered that traditional designs often worked better. The old-timers could have told them this, and often did, but sometimes people need to learn through experience. A young herder returning to traditional militia after struggling with a Western parka that didn't allow proper bathroom access represented cultural knowledge reasserting itself through practical necessity. The Soviet period brought pressure on nomadic peoples to settle in permanent communities. This was presented as modernization and improvement, but often disrupted sustainable traditional lifestyles. Families forcibly settled lost connection to traditional knowledge, including the accumulated wisdom about surviving mobile in extreme cold. Post-Soviet, some families returned to nomadic herding, rediscovering or relearning traditional practices. Elders who'd maintained the old knowledge became crucial teachers. The bathroom techniques that seemed trivial to outsiders represented essential survival skills that settled life had allowed to atrophy. Modern anthropologists working with nomadic Arctic peoples approach traditional knowledge with appropriate respect. The techniques that allow people to thrive in -60 cold without modern infrastructure represent sophisticated technology, just not the kind that requires electricity or manufactured materials. Research partnerships between indigenous communities and scientists have documented traditional practices in detail, creating records that help preserve knowledge even as younger generations increasingly move to settled life and wage employment. These records include, yes, bathroom and hygiene practices, because they're essential components of successful Arctic survival. The Nenets, Sami, Evenki, Chukchi, and other nomadic peoples demonstrated that humans can live comfortably, or at least sustainably, in Earth's coldest inhabited regions using renewable resources and accumulated knowledge. Their bathroom solutions weren't primitive workarounds, but rather refined techniques developed over thousands of years and tested through countless lifetimes. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we mentioned way back? Ancient Egyptians allegedly valued it, though modern archaeologists debate the claim. Arctic nomadic peoples had their own array of unexpected solutions. Certain fish oils that prevented some types of cold injury, specific mineral clays used for hygiene, plant materials with antimicrobial properties. If it worked, it became tradition, regardless of how unlikely it might sound to outsiders. The knowledge these cultures accumulated about thriving in extreme cold informed modern Arctic operations once Western science finally started listening. Military cold weather doctrine, Antarctic station design, and modern Arctic community planning all incorporate lessons that nomadic peoples learned through millennial experience. But the modern world continues creating new extreme cold challenges. Today's Arctic isn't just nomadic herders and research stations. It's industrial operations, resource extraction, and yes, adventure tourism, all of which require sanitation solutions for people who lack both traditional knowledge and permanent infrastructure. You're an ice road trucker hauling supplies across a frozen lake in Canada's Northwest Territories. It's January, the temperature is -45 Celsius, and you've been driving for 6 hours straight. The nearest town is 200 kilometers behind you, and your destination is still 300 kilometers ahead. Your bladder is sending increasingly urgent messages, and you're facing the modern extreme cold bathroom dilemma. You're alone, you're mobile, and you have access to technology that's supposed to make this easier but doesn't always work the way the brochure promised. Welcome to the 21st century, where we've put rovers on Mars and computers in everyone's pockets. but peeing at -70 still requires careful planning and a healthy respect for physics. The modern Arctic and subarctic host an unlikely mix of people and activities. Long-haul truckers servicing remote mining operations, tourists paying premium prices for Northern Lights experiences, oil and gas workers at industrial facilities, climate researchers monitoring environmental change, and adventure athletes attempting extreme challenges. All of them need bathroom solutions. Ice road truckers represent perhaps the most visible modern extreme cold profession, popularized by television but practiced in obscurity for decades before cameras arrived. These drivers haul vital supplies across frozen lakes and rivers to mining camps and communities accessible by truck only during winter when water freezes solid enough to support vehicle weight. The trucks are modern, heated cabs, satellite communications, GPS navigation. But when nature calls 200 kilometers from the nearest building, technology provides limited help. Most ice road truckers carry portable urination devices, essentially bottles or containers designed for the purpose. For more serious needs, options range from chemical portable toilets to the time-honored approach of finding a sheltered spot and working quickly. Modern portable toilets designed for extreme cold use chemical solutions that remain liquid well below freezing. These chemicals break down waste and control odor even when the container's exterior is frozen solid. The technology represents significant improvement over early chemical toilet designs that simply froze unusable in Arctic conditions. The best modern units include insulated containers, chemical solutions specifically formulated for cold weather, and designs that allow operation with gloved hands. A trucker can pull over, use the portable unit in relative comfort, relative being a generous term, and continue driving without the exposure risks of outdoor bathroom breaks at -50. Mining operations in Canada's far north, Alaska, and Siberia employ thousands of workers at remote sites where temperatures routinely drop below -40. Modern mining camps bear little resemblance to Klondike-era tent cities. Workers live in heated dormitories with indoor plumbing, heated walkways connect buildings, and sanitation facilities would meet standards anywhere in temperate climates. The engineering required to maintain these facilities in extreme cold is substantial. All plumbing runs through heated utility corridors or uses heat trace cables wrapped around every pipe. Backup heating systems ensure that even if primary heat fails, sanitation systems have independent power sources. The redundancy costs money, but system failure at a camp housing 500 workers in -60 would be catastrophic. Modern mining camps also maintain backup facilities, portable chemical toilets positioned in heated shelters, in case primary systems fail. Workers know where these backups are located. Regular drills ensure everyone can access backup facilities even during power outages. This level of planning reflects hard-earned institutional knowledge about what happens when sanitation systems fail in environments where you can't just evacuate everyone to hotels. The tourism industry operating in extreme cold regions faces unique challenges. Tourists paying for Arctic experiences expect modern amenities but want authentic wilderness exposure. Balancing these desires while keeping people safe requires creativity. Adventure lodges in northern Canada, Alaska, and Scandinavia offer heated cabins with full bathroom facilities, while positioning themselves as wilderness experiences. The bathrooms work through the same engineering that mining camps use: heated plumbing, backup systems, chemical treatment for waste that will be processed or shipped out. Dog sledding tours, northern lights viewing excursions, and ice hotel stays all require bathroom solutions for guests who may have zero experience with extreme cold. Tour operators typically provide heated, portable facilities at regular stopping points. These aren't crude outhouses, but rather heated shelters containing modern chemical toilets, sometimes even with music and decorative lighting to create ambience. The ice hotels that appear each winter in Sweden, Norway, Canada, and other locations face particularly interesting sanitation challenges. The hotels themselves are made entirely of ice and snow, including the beds, bars, and decorative elements. But bathrooms? Those are in heated separate buildings, because nobody has yet figured out how to make functional ice plumbing or convinced guests that using frozen facilities is part of the authentic ice hotel experience. Climate researchers working at field camps across the Arctic use portable sanitation systems designed for their specific needs. These researchers might camp for weeks at sites accessible only by helicopter or small aircraft, studying climate change impacts on permafrost, ice sheets, or ecosystems. Modern field camp sanitation often uses composting toilet systems that function even when frozen. These systems separate liquid and solid waste, use carbon-rich materials to facilitate breakdown, and produce minimal odor even in confined spaces. They require no water, minimal power, and generate waste that can be processed on-site or transported out more easily than raw sewage. The beauty of modern composting systems is that extreme cold actually helps them function. The cold suppresses odor, slows decomposition in controlled ways, and makes waste easier to handle and transport. What seemed like disadvantage, everything freezing, becomes advantage when systems are designed around it rather than against it. Researchers in Antarctica pioneered many of these advanced portable sanitation systems out of necessity. The solutions developed for Antarctic field camps work equally well in Arctic conditions and have been adopted by research teams, adventure tourists, and even some military operations. Ultramarathon runners competing in extreme cold races. Yes, this is apparently a thing people do voluntarily. Face bathroom logistics during events that might last 24 hours or more in temperatures below -30. Race organizers position heated tents with portable facilities at checkpoints, but between checkpoints, runners must manage on their own. Elite cold-weather athletes develop personalized approaches based on experience. Some minimize intake to reduce bathroom frequency, accepting the dehydration trade-off. Others use portable urination devices that allow them to continue moving without stopping. For solid waste, most accept that stopping at checkpoints is necessary and plan their intake and timing accordingly. The science of athletic performance in extreme cold includes research on digestive function, hydration needs, and yes, bathroom logistics. Sports physiologists study how cold affects everything from bladder capacity to intestinal motility. This research informs training protocols for athletes and also benefits workers in extreme cold industries. Oil and gas operations in Arctic regions, northern Alaska, Russia's Arctic coast, northern Canada, represent some of the most technologically sophisticated extreme cold facilities ever built. Production platforms and processing facilities operate year-round in conditions that routinely reach -50, handling hazardous materials while maintaining environmental and safety standards. These facilities feature sanitation systems that would be at home in any modern industrial site, just with extensive modifications for extreme cold. All plumbing is heated, traced, and monitored constantly. Backup systems have backup systems. Computer monitoring detects any temperature drop that might threaten pipes. The engineering is paranoid by temperate climate standards but essential for reliable Arctic operation. Workers at Arctic industrial facilities experience bathroom conditions as comfortable as office buildings in temperate climates. Heated facilities, pressurized plumbing, even amenities like bidets or heated seats. The contrast with historical frontier conditions is stark. A modern oil platform worker at -60 has better bathroom facilities than Klondike prospectors could have imagined. But when workers need to venture outside for maintenance, inspections, or emergency response, they face the same fundamental challenges humans have always faced in extreme cold. Modern survival suits provide better protection than fur clothing ever could, but biology remains unchanged. If you need to use bathroom facilities while wearing a survival suit designed to keep you alive in Arctic Ocean water, you're facing engineering challenges that even modern materials haven't fully solved. Historians still argue whether modern technology has made extreme cold bathroom logistics genuinely easier or just shifted the problems. Yes, we have heated facilities, chemical toilets, composting systems, and advanced materials. But we've also created situations, industrial operations, tourism, research stations, that require supporting more people in extreme cold than traditional cultures ever attempted. The villages and small towns scattered across Arctic regions of Alaska, Canada, Russia, and Scandinavia use modern municipal infrastructure adapted for permafrost and extreme cold. Water and sewer lines run through heated utilidors, above-ground or shallow-buried utility corridors that prevent freezing while remaining accessible for maintenance. These utilidor systems represent major infrastructure investments for small communities. A town of 500 people might have kilometers of heated utility corridors requiring constant maintenance and consuming significant energy. But the alternative, individual wells and septic systems in permafrost, doesn't work reliably. Some remote communities still use honey bucket systems, essentially modern chamber pots that are emptied regularly at central processing facilities. This seems primitive compared to flush toilets, but in very small communities where utilidor infrastructure costs would be prohibitive, honey bucket systems function reliably and minimize environmental impact when properly managed. The future of extreme cold sanitation technology focuses on closed-loop systems that recycle water and recover resources from waste. These systems, being developed for space exploration, work equally well in Arctic conditions. They could allow remote facilities to operate with minimal water input and waste output, reducing both supply costs and environmental impact. NASA's collaboration with Arctic Research Station operators has produced innovations like water recycling toilet systems that function at extreme cold. These systems recover water from waste through filtration and treatment processes that work even when exterior temperatures are -80. The technology being tested for Mars missions is being proven in Earth's coldest regions first. Modern materials science has produced fabrics and designs that make cold-weather clothing more functional for bathroom access than ever before. High-tech parkas with strategic closures, insulated pants with designed access points, even underwear engineered for rapid management in cold conditions, all represent systematic improvements over the fumbling with frozen buttons experience of earlier eras. But ask anyone who actually works, lives, or adventures in extreme cold, and they'll tell you that traditional indigenous designs still often outperform modern alternatives for specific functions. The Melitza and Gus that Nenets herders perfected over centuries remain unsurpassed for mobile Arctic life. Modern manufacturers increasingly study and incorporate traditional design elements rather than dismissing them as primitive. The convergence of traditional knowledge and modern technology represents the current state of extreme cold bathroom solutions. The best modern systems combine indigenous wisdom about working with cold rather than fighting it, military and industrial engineering experience, research station innovations, and materials science advances. Climate change is transforming the Arctic, with temperatures rising faster at high latitudes than anywhere else on Earth. This creates paradoxes for sanitation infrastructure. Permafrost that's been stable for millennia is thawing, destabilizing buildings and utilities constructed on assumptions of permanent frozen ground. Communities designed for -60 winters face more variable conditions that equipment and procedures aren't optimized for. The future of extreme cold regions may involve less extreme cold, which presents its own challenges. Infrastructure designed for certain temperature ranges may need replacement or modification. Communities may face new disease risks as temperatures allow pathogens to survive that previously died in extreme cold. The solutions that worked for millennia may need adaptation for conditions their inventors never anticipated. But regardless of how the climate changes, humans will continue inhabiting cold regions, whether -40 or -70, and will continue needing practical solutions for basic biological functions. The combination of traditional knowledge, modern engineering, and continued innovation will keep providing those solutions, though probably never making the experience exactly pleasant. You've finished your mental journey across frozen landscapes, through history from indigenous sophistication to European struggles to modern technology. You've encountered chamber pots shattering in Siberian cold, miners desperate in the Yukon, soldiers learning hard lessons, scientists engineering solutions at the South Pole, nomadic herders demonstrating timeless wisdom, and modern workers benefiting from accumulated knowledge. The story of how humans handle bathroom needs in extreme cold is really the story of human adaptation itself. We're tropical apes who evolved in warm climates but spread across the entire planet, including places where our biology is fundamentally unsuited to the environment. We survived and even thrived through observation, innovation, cooperation, and accumulated wisdom passed across generations. Every solution discussed tonight, from Nenet's clothing design to Antarctic vacuum toilets to modern composting systems, represents human ingenuity applied to uncomfortable problems. These aren't glamorous stories that make history books or inspire movies. They're the unglamorous reality that makes human achievement possible. Logistics, including bathroom logistics, enables everything else. So the next time you're frustrated with a cold bathroom on a winter morning, remember that you're experiencing extreme luxury compared to using facilities at -70. Your discomfort is temporary, measured in seconds. The cold water is merely cool, not frozen solid. Your fingers remain functional throughout the experience. The people who lived, worked, explored, and thrived in truly extreme cold, from Nenets herders to Antarctic researchers, demonstrate human capability to adapt to almost anything. They solved problems that seemed impossible using available resources and accumulated knowledge. They maintained not just survival but dignity, humor, and community even while managing biological necessities in conditions designed to kill them. That's worth remembering, perhaps, as you settle deeper into your bed, in your heated home, with modern facilities just down the hall. The vast majority of human history involved far less comfort and far more challenge than most of us experience daily. The bathroom solutions that allow civilization to function in Earth's coldest regions represent countless small innovations, painful lessons, and quiet heroism that rarely gets acknowledged. Your eyelids are growing heavy now. Your breathing is slowing. The stories of frozen chamber pots and Antarctic vacuum systems are fading into comfortable distance. You're warm, safe, comfortable. Conditions that would seem miraculous to those Klondike prospectors or polar explorers struggling through their dark winters. Let those stories drift away now. The images of frozen landscapes softening into peaceful darkness. The history of human adaptation to impossible conditions has been told for tonight. The challenges of extreme cold, the ingenuity of solutions, the persistence of people who refuse to let hostile environments defeat basic human needs. All of it has been shared. Rest now, knowing that human capability extends far beyond what seems possible. Knowing that people before you solved much harder problems than any you're likely to face. Knowing that innovation, cooperation, and accumulated wisdom can overcome almost any challenge. The cold landscapes are fading from thought. The temperature is dropping in your mind, but this time it's the gentle coolness of sleep approaching, not the killing cold of Arctic winter. This is the good cold, the comfortable cold, the cold of fresh sheets and quiet darkness. Sleep well, and may your own bathroom trips tonight require nothing more challenging than a short walk down a warm hallway to modern facilities that work perfectly without requiring any thought or effort. That mundane convenience represents the accumulated effort of countless people solving impossible problems across human history. Sweet dreams.